Welcome to the KAICIID webinar on COVID-19 and religion, sustainable development before and after or during the crisis, the pandemic worldwide today. My name is Patrice Brodeur, and I'm going to be the moderator for this particular webinar. And I welcome first our speakers, 3 of whom are with us and 1 who hopefully might join later. I will introduce them briefly in a minute. I want to begin by saying also thank you, of course, to all of you who have joined in this webinar from wherever you are on planet Earth. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to first give a few little pointers about the presentations that you will hear. They will actually be following one another, about 10 to 15 minutes each. And only after that will we open the space for questions, comments, and answers from the speakers. But while they are speaking, you are most welcome to open the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and type in the questions and comments you have. First, by addressing to whom exactly you're addressing your comment or question. And then write that comment and question. And then you can submit it at any time. And we will have a back facilitator, Miss Anya, who will help us facilitate that side of things by providing me those questions in an appropriate order when we open the space for Q&A. I would also invite you to use the chat space at the bottom of your screen to type in your name and where you're from and if you're affiliated to any particular organization, and let us know who you are so everybody in this virtual space is able to know who's joining in and from where. So thank you for doing so at your leisure at any point in time. Finally, I'd like to just say that Zoom is heavily used worldwide these days. And if by any chance there is technical challenge that we are facing, please accept our apologies in advance. We will do our best to resume. And we may have to either close some videos, if need be, to improve the quality of the oral transmission. But that's plan B. Hopefully we won't need plan B. So that's all for my technical little points at this time. And I'd like to again say thank you very much for your presence online, and say that I would like to begin by simply saying briefly that we will have the following order. We will first have a presentation by Professor Joan Hernandez Serret from ISCREB in Barcelona in Spain. And he will be presenting a general approach to the links between religious international organization or multi-religious international organizations and their link to the SDGs prior to COVID, and hopefully make some links possibly with comments about how the current situation in Christ has changed maybe some of the foci of these organizations today. Then we will have a presentation by Professor Rihanna Abdullah from the University of Malaya in Malaysia. And she will be presenting also in a general way on some of those changes that are taking place now, especially by religious leaders as they have to address this pandemic. The third presentation will be by Professor Baharudin, who will focus a little bit more on Islamic contributions to the question of climate change and how, of course, the current pandemic affects some of our dynamics in relationship to the climate challenges that we're facing, all of us on planet Earth. And finally, hopefully joining us indeed right now, is Ms. Leonie Lewis, who will be presenting also as a 4th speaker when we get to that at this point in time. So welcome, Ms. Lewis, to our webinar space.
Hi, thank you. Call me Leonie, which is a lot easier.
Okay,
nice I'm sorry I'm late. Nice to see everybody.
Welcome indeed. And my name is Patrice Brodeur, and again, welcome everybody. And just to let you know is that as each speaker begins to speak, when I invite them to speak, you will see appearing on the chat space a longer bio about who they are that you can read as they begin speaking. So that's just for your information as well. So let's proceed immediately, and I'm now going to invite Professor Joan Hernandez Serres to begin his presentation, which will include a PowerPoint presentation. So the microphone and the virtual space is yours, Professor Joan.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to stay with you here. Today, my focus today will be on interreligious dialogue, brief analysis of the future challenges and change of the occasion of COVID-19. To make this analysis, I will focus in 2 points: religions and interreligious dialogue, what happened within each religions, and how this interreligious dialogue affect the interreligious dialogue. The religious people and the organization also suffer stress, a new situation that is required an adaptation. It is an opportunity for growing. So the intra-religious dialogue can be analyzed in 2 different contextual movements: lockdown, especially at home, and how it affects to the post-confinement. Home lockdown. Has the religious practice increased during this confinement? According to a study by the University of Barcelona, my colleague that is involved also in the sociology department, he tells us that religion is important in the life of half of the people in the sample. And just over half of the people who answered the questionnaire, 55%, say that they belong to our religions. Before confinement, the level of religious practice of the respondents was not very high. Participation in group or collective practice stand out as being a minority, and only a third of the people in the sample did so. In contrast, almost half, 46%, carry out some type of individual practice before confinement. The confinement seems to be associated with some change in the religiosity and spirituality of the study sample. A third, 32% of the respondents consider themselves more spiritual during the confinement. And in addition, daily practice has increased, whether individual or in group. On the other hand, less frequent practice, weekly or occasionally, have a greatly decreased. With the confinement and the impossibility of meeting and attending the centers of the worship, it was expected that the collective religious practice will be disappear. But as we can see, although they have been reduced, they have not disappeared. Possibly, this is due to the adaptation of some communities to the situation and the introduction of the new technologies as means of practicing. It's also possibly that within the families with which they cohabit, some collective practice that were previously done sporadically can now be carried out on a daily basis. Confinement appears that to have been opportunity for introspection and that has increased in the spiritual and daily religious practice. Has it affected the religious life? Yes. As we have seen, the confinement has affected the basic element of religious practice, for example, death, illness, difficulties of celebration, sacrament practice, the ritual washing of the bodies, wake ceremonies, and passes away, decent burials, especially the lack of space in the case of Muslim in Spain, collection of donation is a form of financing a lot of religious organization. In the theological approach as well, some voice ask about why we suffer a pandemic in terms of theological approach. Is it necessities of understanding? Is it divine punishment? Is it a result of our attitude? Is it an opportunity? What do religions have to say about this? In the post-confinement, some affected examples include more desires to meet and hold religious celebrations, restricting of the planet activities, accumulation of the celebrations, new ways of relation, the technological, and how does its inter-religious dialogue affect the inter-religious dialogue? The adaptation of religions to a new situation affect the inter-religious dialogue in different ways. For example, meeting in person and the quality of the dialogue is an authentic relationship. Is in the authentic inter-religious dialogue requires contact, not only verbal, but also physical. Maybe it's a moment for reflex about this necessity. Also, is a potential shared project or foresight of future projects. It's in a focuses on specific issues of each religion that call for urgency to resolve. Living the uncertainty together. Facilitate the fact of being able to share those vital joint action. And defending not only those in need most, support for homeless people, making masks, but also the defense of those excluded from society. For example, the Chinese community, the infected, the Spanish community, in some depend of the media, and restricted and change in the project objectives. And also restricted and change in the project in the SDG. If you compare, this is the graphic, if you compare the relationship between the SDGs and the interreligious organization, you can see in the graph the priorities. And the SDG 3, the health, was present only in 4.9% of the activities. It is insignificant compared in the rest of the activities. It now is a chance to becoming a change of purposes in the society. So for conclude, in light of current the COVID pandemic, I want to reflect on the new relationship in this joint learning that has the affected of religions equally. The adversity can be able to see as an opportunity for change and growing as well. Why not? For example, joint loss management, this can only be in the hands of the administration, but maybe manifest the interreligious dialogue can to respond to this united message, a shared message. Maybe understand and develop the potential of change and action of interfaith groups, especially through the specific action and campaigns. Or maybe the recollection of the religion in the public sphere and its priority as a society. How affect the pandemic in a secular society development, rated, less relevance? Thank you very much for your attendance. You need to...
Indeed. Sorry. You see, the classical mistake, right? The moderator who turns off and mutes himself. My apologies for that. I just want to thank you, gracias, Professor Joan Hernandez Serret from Barcelona, for this wonderful, excellent PowerPoint presentation that I think provides us with an excellent overview start on some of the transformations that are taking place as we speak because of the COVID-19 pandemic and affecting practices of religious communities in different ways worldwide. All human beings are affected to different degrees depending on where we live. And all religious communities, of course, are also in need of adapting to the circumstances, and again, to different degrees, depending on the degree of the numbers of people being affected by the virus. And it's very fascinating to look at the presentation you've made and look at it in terms of percentages of decrease in practices, but yet increase in questions of meaning, of questions about, well, what does it mean to be faces this worldwide pandemic today? Which of course then brings out sort of questions of religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, and other kinds of beliefs as well, as we relate to this new reality that we're all questioning ourselves about and trying to make sense of. So thank you very much for raising those important questions, providing us with an excellent start. Again, let me remind the audience virtually that you can ask your questions in the Q&A section whenever you feel like it. But we will now move to the other three presentations before we actually end up sort of opening up and using your questions and comments in the Q&A section after the next three presentations. So thank you again, Professor Hernandez Serret. I would like now to invite Professor Rihanna Abdullah from the University of Malaya, where she is Dean of the Dean of the Academy of Islamic Studies. She has been among many things, and you will see again her CV or a bio appearing on the chat as we speak now. But one thing I'm impressed by in the bio is that from 2011 to 2013, she was the director of the Center for Civilizational Dialogue, and which is partly the reason why she later on became one of the fellows of the KAICIID Dialogue Center. And linking up to her experience of dialogue at an intercivilizational level and contributing so much to our fellowship program at KAICIID in that respect. And it's also the dialogue, the Center for Civilizational Dialogue is an institution at the University of Malaya where Professor Baharudin, who will be the following speaker, is honorary professor as well. And so thank you to both of you. But let us now turn to you, Professor Abdullah, for your presentation. So please, the microphone is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Badr. And I think I would also like to thank KAICIID. And it looks like I, again, with KAICIID. And last year I was with KAICIID as the International Fellow. And I think this year I was very glad that I can contribute something from Malaysia to this forum. And my topic is actually something to do with the role of religious leaders, or yes, some people also call it as a faith leaders during this COVID-19 pandemic. And I will focus on the, some of the issues concerning Muslim communities in Malaysia. And I also believe that it also happen the similar issues in other countries, especially among the Muslim communities. And as we know that, before that, I think I would like to say good evening to all the panelists and also to the participants from this region, and good afternoon from the other regions, especially from the probably in Vienna. It's in afternoon. Prof? Yes. Okay. Before I can, analyze or discuss about the role of these religious leaders, a very brief introduction about Malaysia is that Malaysia, the population is actually approximately 60%, approximately. Some says 59%, 60%, 62% of Muslims in Malaysia. So the Muslim community or the Muslim populations in Malaysia is not, have a very strong majority Muslims compared to countries like Indonesia, Pakistan, or Jordan, or Iran, and and the rest. Right. When we talk about the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic that happened in Malaysia, I would like to start with looking at the background of this incident of this pandemic. early January, February of this year, is actually the statistics is actually below, let's say, 10 cases, but it suddenly increased into, you know, more than 100 cases after the we link this you know, statistics to what is known as the tabligh cluster, because our Ministry of Health you know, identifies some of the you know, some of the clusters, you know, for example, the huge clusters we call it as a tabligh clusters, where they are, for example, I think in more than 10,000 of you know, Muslims communities, they have a gathering at the Sri Petaling Mosque. So you can imagine that the number of you know, followers or those who have the gatherings in this mosque is about 10 to 12,000. It's a yearly a gathering among the Muslims, and there are also certain followers, the Muslims actually from outside Malaysia came together, and they have sort of like a religious activities there. And it started when one of the you know, those who gather at that mosque, he actually went back to Brunei, okay, and then you know, the outbreak actually started when this you know, this a Muslim guy actually was detected as a positive COVID-19, and then it started, you know, to trace who is actually, or where is he actually get this positive COVID-19, and then they traced that it started from this huge gathering at the Sri Petaling Mosque. All right, okay. 12,000 people gathered at this mosque. 1,500 were from outside Malaysia, and in April 2020, 28,400 cases from this gathering, this tabligh cluster, and 1,950 were positive with COVID-19. So they have screened 28,000 and 1,950 were positive, right? With these situations, you know, there's an sort of like an accusations to the religious group, especially the Muslims, by saying that this group actually caused the transmissions of the virus, but you know, a lot of you know, people are trying to say, even the authority from the mosque says that we are not transmitted, the tabligh were not transmitted the virus, but this kind of negative perceptions actually you know, to a certain extent make the people panic actually in that situations, okay? And every day the Director General of Ministry of Health share some of the update. And in the beginning, they started to use the word tabligh cluster, but since there's you know, negative connotations of that, they changed to the gathering of the Sri Petaling Mosque cluster. So no longer use the word you know, tabligh group, but still the word mosque is there, meaning that we cannot deny that that is the beginning where the statistics actually increase. All right, and started from there, the authorities, especially from the Ministry of Health, you know, and the other partners, carried out cleaning and disinfections works surrounding the mosque. And many religious or the Muslims leaders actually call the group to come forward and have and give cooperations to the Ministry of Health, to get some health screening. And I think Alhamdulillah, actually throughout the 2 months or 3 months, we actually get fully cooperations from the people that gathered in the mosque. All right, and after that, in the meantime, okay, the Special Muzakarah Committee meeting of the National Fatwa Council made a decisions on 15th of March 2020, that is before the government announced the semi-lockdown in Malaysia, that the decision say that to postpone all religious activities in the mosque, including Friday prayer. So this is something which is, to some people, it's a panic, because we are no longer can perform the Friday prayers and also all the religious activities, because it never happened in a lifetime. Okay, so the authorities actually call the Muslim communities, okay, to perform their prayers at home during the month of Ramadan. As we know that every night during the month of fasting or Ramadan, the Muslims actually gather, to perform, their prayers there every month, every day. So this time, throughout the month of Ramadan, there are no Friday, or also the what we call is a Tarawih, or prayers during the month of Ramadan, and also as well as the 8 prayers, and the weekly Jumaat prayer was also no longer performed in the mosque, and the mosques were closed. Okay, they closed the door of the mosque, nobody in the mosque, and no activities. And we also received some response from the communities, the Muslims communities. They feel sad, and because they said that there's no activities that can enliven the mosque. Okay, and they said that some say that this is the end of the world, because there's no activities in the mosque. Okay, and no ordinary funeral for the dead body, and if there's a COVID-19 a body, the funeral is also limited, and also concluded with a limited presence of people and also the family. Right. What I wanted to say here, if we see that the communities, the Muslim communities, actually, keep on asking, as Professor Joan said, that whether this is something which is a bad, or something which is, a test from God. And as I said, that some people a little bit of confused, but there's a lot of informations, especially from the religious leaders, sharing, this kind of pandemic is not new. It happens also, even the Prophet Muhammad said that if there's a plague, then you have to run away from the plague. In other words, that this is also probably, we can say, a test, and there's a wisdom behind this pandemic. So these kind of discussions among the religious leaders and also the communities, and also, as I said, that the religious leaders come together with the public health authorities to make or to calm down, to cool down the Muslims communities, that this is something that we have to live on. We have to look it as something there's a wisdom behind, and what I can say that the faith leaders influence the peoples very much in terms of life, their behavior, their actions and values. That is the reason why we need authorities, or we call it as religious leaders or faith leaders, to to address not just these pandemic situations, other kind of situations, for example, violence against women, peace, for example, youth, and I believe that we cannot deny the role of the religious leaders on, addressing some of the current issues. And also, I also believe that the religious leaders becoming part of the solutions, especially to ensure or to curb the spread of the virus, promoting together with the authorities that you have to, you have to do the social distancings, where you can see now in almost mosques in the world, even in the mosque in Makkah and also Medina, where there's a social distancing. For some people, they say that we are trying to trying to follow what other religions distancing in their house of worship. But this is not the issue of following other religions, to perform prayers, but this is the most priority is what the public health or WHO said, that to curb this issue is by social distancing and also by frequent hygiene. And I would like to conclude by saying that yes, religious leaders actually play a very vital role, especially to curb this and also to promote some of the good practices. And they can also address, the issue of, the pandemic or COVID-19 is very harmful. And although the mosque is not, we cannot perform or religious activities in the mosque, but we still can pray at home. So by, cooperate with the authorities and also disseminate clear and accurate informations about how Islam deal with these pandemic situations, I think the Muslims communities can accept it, although they feel sad. I think a lot of, the Muslim community say that we are very sad. There's no activity, religious activities in the mosque. But what we can do is we just follow what the authorities, either the religious leaders and also the public health authorities. And I think with that, I conclude my sharing of thought. Thank you.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much, Professor Rihanna Abdullah. It's really important, the many points that you have raised. It's extremely enlightening to understand, in particular, some Malaysian perspective and Muslims there being the majority, how they have coped with the situation and its early developments. and some of the replications and the implications that it has had, in particular, with the spread from initially the context that you've mentioned. So thank you for that. It's important to understand sort of the, now, because there's a few months that have passed, we're beginning to make sense of how the beginning took place, who spread what, and that historical perspective is really important. First, to reduce the stereotypes that have sometimes grown in fake news about sort of who's responsible for all of this, but also because it helps us understand sort of the pluses and the minuses that have faced, that religious communities have faced when it comes to responding and speed of response to this crisis. And I will elaborate a little bit more on this after the presentations are finished. And I just will say this at the moment to make the connection now with Professor Baharudin. And I'd like to welcome you, Professor Baharudin, who is Director General of the Institute Kefahaman Islam Malaysia, as well as honorary professor at the Center for Islamic Civilizational Dialogue at the University of Malaya, as I mentioned before. So welcome again with us, and it is now your turn to present. Please.
Thank you very much, Professor Bodu. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Our respected panelists, Ms. Anjur from KAICIID itself, our audience from everywhere, as you said, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very warm good night to you. It's 8:40 p.m. in Malaysia, and we are very happy that from IKIM, you can see some posters behind me. On behalf of IKIM, we are very honored, Professor Rihanna and also KAICIID, for having invited us to be part of this sharing tonight. I think I really appreciate the presentations by both panelists before this, and Prof. Rihanna has given a very insightful glimpse into what actually took place in Malaysia vis-a-vis COVID-19. So our topic is COVID-19 and religion, sustainable development before and after the crisis. So as a matter of focus, IKIM, Institute of Islam, or Institute for Islamic Understanding, is a think tank that actually analyzes the religious values and principles and see how Islamic tenets, Islamic solutions, as we say, might be able to give or provide solutions for current crisis faced by humanity. And so we'd like also Islam to be better understood, and we say this in a very humble way, to be better understood by Muslims, and especially by friends who are non-Muslims, to curb Islamophobia, to encourage greater interactions, because as far as the world is concerned, and we all know that there is a huge environmental crisis we are all facing, and we often hear of the concept of climate change, which I will touch a little bit upon also in my short presentation. We need to move together, and certainly the role of interfaith dialogue, the role of religious leaders coming together and finding what are our common values, what are our common ways of mitigating the effects of climate change, need to be enhanced. So I hope that KAICIID will not make this the first and the last forum available for all of us, and we would like very much in the future, Prof. Rihanna, to have a series of these conversations. So very happy to meet all of you. So I will start by saying that firstly, COVID-19, whether we think that it was man-made, or whether it's something that took place accidentally. Yeah, even if we say that, let's say it took place without anybody trying to make it happen, let us get rid of all those fake news and whatnots. But if you look at things scientifically and in a very objective manner, from the Islamic perspective, what happened was, people made experimentations with nature. If we follow what happened, COVID, the virus, came out of the interaction, of the virus inside of the bodies of animals, which in Islam perspective, we understand that certain foods are haram, not allowed, certain foods are halal, which are good for you. So just from that angle, we want to bring the what we call it, argumentation or narrative to the point where once the virus started to sort of do what it did, and for the first time ever, as we have, many of us have mentioned in this regard, this is the first time in our lifetime we see this virus affecting the whole globe. It's the whole planet, And I think the latest count is almost 500,000 people have passed away, have lost their lives because of this pandemic. And this also brings us to the point that the environment crisis, the climate change that is affecting us, is exactly that. It's got a very global impact. So maybe we don't have time here, but you see there are very, very close links between how humans have dealt with nature, with how nature has reacted, if you have to use that phrase. Humankind always say that, oh, nature is angry, nature is getting back at us. Think about it. From the Islamic perspective, we are the vicegerents. We are the keepers of nature. We even if you do not admit the religious worldview, you understand that Homo sapien is the best species, if not one of the best species, because he's been given reason or akal to think. And the other creations, they don't have science, they don't have knowledge like we have. So we can work it out and we know what's wrong. And then we go on to make the connection between what's wrong with the environment and the total effects of what's wrong with the environment being manifested in terms of all the effects of climate change, rising seawaters, coastal erosion, uncertainty in the weather, and now this COVID is also, for me, an element of climate change. And what has it done? It has wreaked havoc in terms of the economy, in terms of our social life, everything. Life is different. And we struggle with the new norms, with the new normals. Like my colleague, Prof. Rihanna says, the most fundamental element in a so-called religious person's life, which is being in the houses of worship, even that is a no-go, And I think fellow colleagues who are, in the Christian tradition or some other religious traditions can understand what it is like not to be able to do the pilgrimage anymore. Muslims like to say that if you get to go to Mecca, then you are the guests of Allah. It's as if Allah says, no, I don't need any more guests to visit my house. So it's a very impactful phenomenon. And again, Muslims are called forth to reflect on what the Quran says. For example, in Surah Ar-Rum, where one of the ayats explicitly says, now you can see fasad, or now you can see disturbances on land, in water, in the air, because of the hands of mankind. And pause again. What has led to disturbances in nature? Because we have failed to understand that there are limits to how human beings can deal with nature. Just now we spoke about experimenting with eating foods. Now, when I say all this, I am very respectful of various ethnics, various countries' food mannerisms and all of that. I'm not into, us pointing fingers. No, not at all. I'm just saying that there are other things like other viruses like the dengue fever in Malaysia. That's also due to a virus. And that's due to mosquitoes, right? And in Malaysia, there's a spiking of dengue fever at the moment. Why? Because of the inability of certain communities to take care of their rubbish and waste materials. And because we have warm weather, and because now we have a lot of rain, and even in a 10-piece, in a in a small space, small volume of water, given a few days, the mosquito can breed, at a very high speed. So this, what I'm talking here is something that is of a universal concern. Therefore, first lesson learned is that we have to respect nature. We have to respect nature according to what we know from the sciences, right? We have to respect nature according to what we know from the revelations or the religious books. And there are guidelines in both of these books, yeah? And then we also have in our topic today sustainable development, yeah? So sustainable development goals, as everybody knows, is contain 17 goals, yeah? Now, I think people can quickly Google, what are the 17 goals. And goal number 1, no poverty. Goal number 2, zero hunger. Number 3, health and well-being, quality education, and so on and so on. And many of these goals actually pertain to social well-being, human well-being, and also to the environment, water, air, and all of that. And what happened during the pandemic, I think this is observable all over the world. Rivers became cleaner, yeah. Birds started to come out, and the air became much cleaner. So the theory for people who don't believe that the environmental issue is human-made, yeah, this is a kind of argument, yeah, a realistic argument to say that, look, when we got locked in, yeah, and we didn't mess with nature, nature came back to life. It reminds you of the book by Rachel Carson in 1960s, Silent Spring, yeah, when she said that, we are all heading to a time when spring would be silent, no more birds. And now we're seeing the reverse of that. When we leave nature alone and when we stop disturbing it in an overload manner, yeah, it comes alive again. So for us in Malaysia, the pandemic and the lockdowns actually taught us something, and we'd like to imagine that the sustainable development goals are now, to many people, yeah, are real. They are real, and that tampering with nature in a manner that is unethical, in a manner that induces injustices to nature and to other human beings, yeah, it's just not on. So post, because your topic also says before and after the crisis, yeah. So post-pandemic, post-COVID, and inshallah we pray, as Prof. Rihanna says, that the pandemic will be over soon. What we are doing also in Malaysia now in many quarters, and I'm sure it's the same in many other countries, people are rethinking their economic system, because a lot of people have been laid off. You have to consider now, you have to reprioritize, and you go back to the SDG goals. What is most critical here? To create decent work, to make sure there's zero hunger. We never thought that in Malaysia, and I say this most humbly, and I'm sure my fellow Malaysians will not be angry with me, we actually witness people going hungry. And we know from the information that we exchange amongst ourselves globally, yeah, in many other countries, people also went hungry. And these are not people unlike us talking in this forum. These are people with houses, with motor cars, and so on and so on. So how did that happen? So it just shows how unstable our economic and social systems connected to that system of economics have become along the trajectory of us, degrading the planet, environmentally speaking. So finally, my point today is in 2015, a group of Muslim scientists, non-Muslim scientists, Muslim and non-Muslim policymakers, and also we invited religious leaders from other faith traditions, Christianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism. We came up with what we call the Islamic Declaration for Climate Change. Yeah, and inside here we declare our firm belief in the Creator, in how nature is created with balance, And you can easily understand this if you understand the concept of ecology, for example, in ecological balance. How the Prophet taught us to live simply and not, and not to overconsume. It's a full-fledged declaration, and I would urge everyone to, if they have time, to Google this. And it was launched in August in 2015 in conjunction with the International Islamic Symposium on Climate Change in Istanbul, Turkey, right? And we begin with telling people and describing to ourselves what has gone wrong. Where did we go wrong? And we base our arguments on data collected via the research of more than 100 countries, of researchers in more than 100 countries. And these reports and data are supported. I mean, it's available universally. But what is critical is at the end of the declaration, there are recommendations for all sectors of society, and this is what some of us, especially at KAICIID and the Center for Civilizational Dialogue, the local universities, and hopefully in the region and internationally, we hope to be able to say to messages to offset the imbalances that has taken place. We call on the well-off nations, for example, and all producing states to recognize the moral obligation to reduce consumption so that the poor may benefit from what is left of the earth's non-renewable resources, to refocus their concerns from unethical profit from the environment to preserving it and elevating the condition of the world's poor. There are many others, but I'm just picking up some of the salient points. And then the declaration called on the people of all nations and their leaders to commit themselves to 100% renewable energy and or a zero emission strategy as early as possible to mitigate the environmental impact of the activities. Another point, to realize that to chase after unlimited economic growth on a planet that is finite and already overloaded is not viable. To chase after unlimited economic growth on a planet that is finite, and already overloaded is not viable. Growth must be pursued wisely and in moderation, placing a priority on increasing the resilience of all, and especially the most vulnerable, to the climate change impacts already underway and expected to continue for many years to come. And finally, we call upon corporations, finance, and the business sector to shoulder the consequences of their profit-making activities and take a visibly more active role in reducing their carbon footprint and other forms of impact upon the natural environment, to change from the current business model, which is based on an unsuitable escalating economy, and adopt a circular economy that is wholly sustainable. There is much work to be done. And like has been said before, like we have witnessed in Malaysia, the close cooperation between the Ministry of Health, the Umara and the Ulama, the ministry in charge of religious affairs. We have seen how they work closely, the Akli and Nakli, the knowledge of the world and knowledge of from revelation. They work tremendously, fantastically effectively, to curb down the worry, to stabilize situations. The hungry people were fed, across the board. We didn't care whether they were just Muslims or not. Across the board, we worked together. And then at the higher levels, and this is where it takes a real effort. And I hope that the forum today, KAICIID and the organizers of this forum can lend a voice, to the policymakers and the people that are in power in our countries, across the board, to make the changes that we just touched upon just now. So in conclusion, I think that COVID-19 has got very much to do with religion, because as pointed out by the United Nations Secretary General recently, he said the time has come for accountability, responsibility, and leadership to end climate change. And remember, climate change has everything to do with COVID and other pandemics, because this is not going to be the only pandemic that can happen. Conversations are now shifting to a value discussion about objectives framing the decisions that need to be made by national leaders and international community, and that it is high time now we pull out the ethics issue from under the carpet, put it on the table. People must be responsible and accountable. So you don't have to be like overly religious about this. Even if you just want to speak in conventional language, it is all there. And the SDG goals represent you in that sense. And for the Muslims, for example, the maqasid Sharia, the objectives of the Sharia or the so-called laws of the religion is to preserve 5 items, 5 things. Yeah, your faith, your reason, your life, your mal, your economic means, and also your lineage. So think about it. These 5 things are encompassing everything that we stand for in this life. So with that, I thank you very, very much for giving me this opportunity, and I hope that we can meet again, if not in real life, on screen. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Again, thank you very much. Terima kasih, Professor Baharudin, for this rich presentations that you have shared with us today. To me, it's incredibly important to make those links between the COVID crisis and being linked to, in a way, sort of not respecting sort of how we relate as human beings to our natural environment and the animal world. And when crossing those boundaries in dangerous experimentations, sometimes, unfortunately, there are disastrous results, as we now see the impact of. So thank you for making those links, and therefore coming back to the values and the respect that we need to have for nature, and thus also raising some incredibly important questions of meaning about sort of economic philosophy, underpinning particular ways of life that are not sustainable for the future of humanity on our planet Earth, and calling for accountability and responsibility. So thank you for bringing all of this up to us. I'd like to now move to our final panelist, Leonie Lewis from England, who is MBE and as a director in the past for many years of the Jewish Volunteering Network. She has experience with, among many other things, with humanitarian action, humanitarian aid, and the incredible role that volunteering plays in translating a human being's commitment to helping other human beings, whether this comes from a broad ethical anchoring and commitment to, which may or may not be linked to a religious worldview, or whether it is simply because one is, facing with the urgency of helping each other in our neighborhoods and families to make ends meet. Whatever the source is, we welcome now Leonie Lewis's presentation to contribute also her perspective to the incredible challenge that we're facing in this pandemic crisis. And so the floor is yours, Leonie.
Thank you very much, Patrice, and thank you so much for my wonderful esteemed colleagues. Shalom, salam, alaikum, buenos dias to you, Dr. Serret, how are you? It's a great honor for me to be with KAICIID today, and what I want to try and do is, from a practitioner perspective, I want us to remind ourselves what civil society is all about. I then want to look at it and focus and drill down to the faith sector, and then a little bit about the response during the crisis of the faith sector, and then I will try and draw in some conclusions which I think, I hope, have universal applicability. As you've said, Patrice, my background has been in the volunteering sector for 30, 40 years. I have done some work with the government too in that sphere. And my current role as trustee of the Faiths Forum for London, I'm also now engaged with an organisation called the Cities of Faith and Community Forum, CFCF, which is looking to bring together cities in Europe to understand areas of concern and challenges that we as cities can respond to, because cities have become much more of nation states than they previously have been for many years. Let us just remind ourselves what we define as civil society, because I think everything you've been talking about, particularly you, Dr. Azizan, is very much around climate and changes and places of worship we've talked about. They form part of civil society. The World Bank defines civil society as the wide array of non-governmental and not-for-profit organizations that have a presence in public life express the interests and values of their members and others based on ethical, cultural, political, scientific, religious, or philanthropic considerations. This, of course, includes the big and the small NGOs, like Amnesty International, labor unions, religious communities, like many of ours, and multi-faith organizations, such as Religions for Peace, and other activism and social movements rallying around specific causes. Civil society, we know, is an essential stakeholder in the global ecosystem and democratic states, and forms a core part of international coronavirus recovery. I think every one of us agrees, and you just pointed to the UN, who've made several comments in this respect, and in the World Health Organization. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed systemic flaws and drastic inequality in our global neoliberal system. Civil society has a critical role in global pandemic and economic recovery, and in the wake of the crisis, civil society can serve as an advocate, a watchdog, and a trusted authority. For example, a privileged minority of the global population has been able to work from home. I have that myself, while the majority of workers have risked their own health and the health of their families to keep food on the table. The virus has revealed the essential value of underpaid positions in the health and food production sectors. These socioeconomic impacts are felt even more by women. I think you mentioned this point to Dr. Rihanna, who make up the majority of the essential workforce here and are more likely to do unpaid domestic and care work, also working in hospitals, in our NHS, the National Health Service. Indigenous and rural communities without running water for regular and careful hand washing are also disproportionately affected. The pandemic has revealed how our unequal global systems make us vulnerable to future system-level challenges, economic crises, climate change, as we just heard, and future pandemics. The faith sector in many regions of civil society has more trust and moral authority than the government, as well as a wide network that reaches the most rural areas. This is especially true, I believe, in the case for faith communities, which provide aid, but also solidarity to vulnerable parts of society. Religious communities and multi-faith organizations and community organizations have met the needs of local, regional, and global communities. The importance of caring for the most vulnerable is deeply embedded in many of our traditions, and many religious communities provide essential social services like childcare and hunger relief. Closing a place of worship, and I myself am Jewish, and our synagogues have been closed throughout the United Kingdom. Closing such places has prevented the spread of the coronavirus, but it can also put the beneficiaries of these programs in serious danger. In summary, the faith sector is key to civil society, as it, I believe, addresses needs at local level, often by the delivery of services, particularly to marginalized and isolated groups, and of course is rooted in local communities. I think we've all said that it also works to build cohesion, and of course we do, and we've just heard, speak out on current issues. This often leads our sector to critique the challenges of government, a central role within communities, and often generates local trust. In summary here, the faith sector makes a multifaceted contribution to individual and community well-being. It aims to be strongest, I feel, where social need is highest, and it can reach parts of society that other groups struggle to connect with. And during the pandemic and before, we've been active in areas of high need. And this is in the UK, but I'm sure this is global, and I certainly know it's true in Europe. We've been very active in the need of homelessness and food deprivation. We've heard from some of our speakers today about poverty. We've heard about the fact that we have a rise in crime. So civil society and faith sector looking at crime prevention, alcohol dependency, mental health, well-being, the abuse of women. We also have the ability to stimulate high levels of volunteering, and this is the background from which I find myself. Congregations and other places of worship provide physical infrastructure and complex social networks that can be leveraged for a wide range of issues. And as we know, they provide access to informal support, food, healthcare, education and job opportunities through extended social networks and linkages with other community institutions. Finally, on this point, just to remind us all that it was a study done back in the 2012 by an organization I think called the Pew Research Center, which indicated that more than 80% of people around the world adhere to religion. Therefore, viewing religion as a single sector also obscures the complex and diverse nature of our communities and how they relate to the state. So let's focus, I want to drill down a little bit about focusing around the crisis. We know, sadly, we've had a long history of pandemics and not such a global state as the one we're currently in, but demonstrate that religious factors, beliefs and institutions do play important roles in everyday life for the majority of the people worldwide. Religious congregations play even more important roles in particular subgroups, such as low-income communities, and among certain racial ethnic minority groups and immigrants, which are very important in Europe and the UK now. The elderly and other vulnerable groups, making faith-based organizations critical to an overall COVID-19 response, both in the short, the medium and in the long term. As the need to enforce physical distancing became central to public health and governments made decisions worldwide to close places of interest and religious gatherings, we had to think about what were the emerging obvious needs. These public faith partnerships also drew lessons, as we know, from earlier pandemics, notably in Africa, HIV, AIDS, and Ebola, where religious engagement was vital and evidenced on the front line by multilateral cooperation by faith leaders. So the coronavirus today has affected three key aspects, I feel, of religious life. They talk about it affects religious life itself, religious rights. It affects something called community, congregation, and the third one is pastoral care and charitable work. All these realms, however painful it can be when religion is left out, demonstrate this much more so. They also demonstrate a creativity and generosity of religious leaders who have been working to adapt to their circumstances, finding ways, as we've heard in the mosques and across the country, how they can serve their communities even under exacting restrictions. Religion has been credited with slowing down the spread of COVID-19, strangely enough, as we've heard a lot about the opposite. As in many low-income countries, faith leaders are often perceived as more trustworthy than health officials and have been able to offer communities health information framed in ways that are culturally and theologically relevant, as well as being understandable and contextually practical. One of the big challenges here in the London area was in a massive diverse community of different ethnic groups that we understood from the Hindu community. They didn't really respond as well as they should have done at the very early outset. Why? Because most of the information was in English. And most of the senior citizens, those over 60, 70 and older, could not read it and understand it fully. So that until they were translated and put on doors of temples and gurdwaras into Punjab and Gujarat, they weren't read or understood fully. Let us quickly now look briefly at some of the responses over the last 4 months. And we're using one now. The whole world has changed. We're using online platforms, not just to communicate with each other and have meetings, but we've had platforms to worship, offering much, and our platforms within the synagogue environment, but primarily within the faith communities right across the UK, and I've seen in Europe, have given much needed pastoral support as well as faith online. And I heard that one Facebook group of over 6,300 clergy representing various traditions across the world share resources on how they can support mosques, temples and churches, particularly regarding infection control measures. We also know that we've changed in terms of our response to how we not just do meetings, etc. online, but Zoom has changed, and such meetings like Zoom, digital technology has changed the way we are operating and working. I'm not saying it's better, but it is different. And it has meant that people can come together for an opportunity to meet each other, even if it's only our heads that actually talk to one another. Places of worship, because we've had to follow guidance, we've had to think about the digital connection far more than we have done ever before. But we have to recognize that many people who are both lonely and isolated may not have those skills or the access to information technology, which is a big challenge. And we've seen this in schools right across the country. So we have therefore an entire demographic left feeling secluded and disconnected in a time when the world is left to congregate on the internet. In response to this recent spike in the digital divide, churches and organisations on the ground are, though, creating innovative projects. One such scheme presented in Ireland by the Irish chaplaincy was the fact that the process of handing out specifically designed tablets to the chaplaincy's clients. This included a number of staff team with remote access to the tablets to provide technical support while keeping them safe. So by including a portable Wi-Fi connection, the lack of Wi-Fi in the home did not serve as a problem. That was I thought was very interesting. The other thing that's happened in relation to this is that young people who are really at the sharp end of digital technology have been able and used to support it more effectively, and we should utilize their support in a way that they can really access and help those who might need it more. I want to report also a little bit about the work of Caritas, the international Catholic charity, who said that one of the big things that has happened, and this is my background, is they've had what they call a silver lining to the pandemic, a huge and generous increase of volunteers across Europe and worldwide. They said it's been wonderful to witness the number of people willing to be the smiling face for others in the time of national emergency. And these volunteers often are younger because some of them have opportunity to be more mobile in the current climate and can aid the most vulnerable people in a parish. We also know that many local communities and places of worship have chosen to, those who've offered opportunities to volunteers to go to doorsteps, to put what we would call a hello, a letter of welcome through a letterbox, leaving a little gift on a doorstep to make sure that everybody has a sense of community, even if they can't be joining together. In my own area, and I live in a very large London borough, very diverse, with the largest population of Hindu community in London. We have several parishes which have been encouraging things such as encouraging knitting and sewing groups from home, where they're providing clothes for babies born in lockdown, and also for safe houses for women who've been trafficked, and providing as many, I know this is across Europe, who've been having to make scrubs and PPE equipment, masks for care workers, because in the UK we had a big challenge of getting the right equipment at the right time. It was a problem of Brexit at the time, and we just didn't have the equipment. So people were making masks. Many of these people, hundreds of volunteers are doing this, are from the faith communities. So in order to help shelter people from harm, they are contacting people by phone, a traditional way that we forgot how to meet people. Finally, to conclude, things that we need to think about. To increase global resilience, we need a new social contract, called for by citizens, civil society organizations, and perhaps businesses too. To be effective in tackling COVID-19 pandemic, governments and international aid agencies need to further existing efforts to develop faith literacy by prioritizing training staff in their religious and cultural context. We need to continue to encourage the inclusion of faith leaders in program design and delivery. We need to reduce the need for in-person gatherings. Religious leaders are coming up with innovative, creative options, and we should continue these ideas. We also need to do something which has happened a lot in the UK and certainly London-wide, creating what they call government local community hubs, which are online, which give information to everybody in different languages about volunteering, about the NHS, about government, about place of worship, and so on and so forth. And finally, we need to find a way of formally engaging young people through our interfaith organizations and at local government leader to be engaged particularly around digital literacy. Religious leaders have a role to oppose scapegoating other religions and incitements to bigotry or violence. We're living in a virtual world. Solidarity between religions and faith is critical. We need to work to tackle racism and discrimination within healthcare and other systems. And I think that's the work, maybe together with KAICIID and other such similar organizations, we can do this together. And finally, we have to be aware of something which we've recently called compassion fatigue, because there are so many people now doing things, and they're going to get fed up. The NHS called for thousands of people to get involved with the National Health Service. I think close to 500,000 people said they were willing to help. They could only place 100,000 people to volunteer. Those other people are going to get seriously upset about it. And this is happening. The more we do, and if you're not using it and you're not getting involved, people will get upset. My last comment. Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, Minister for Human Rights, reiterated the UK government's ongoing commitment to working with faith leaders to meet the challenges posed by the pandemic, both in the UK and internationally. He said, as the coronavirus pandemic continues to have an unprecedented impact on communities around the world, we know more than ever, that we will only succeed in fighting it if we do so together. Even small actions can demonstrate care and respect for others. Thank you.
Many thanks, Leonie, Lewis, Toda Rabba. It's wonderful to have listened to you and learned in many important aspects of the crisis, but the calls that you are putting forward, the example, the practical example, most of whom are practical and positive examples of the role of faith communities and both actors and leaders, as well as the broader civil society and the links between religious communities and civil society in this, in trying to talk, to move towards a recovery from this pandemic are incredibly important for us to learn about, to hear, and to hopefully translate into our own context wherever we are at this moment in time on the planet. So thank you very much for your contribution today. I'd like to say that we have about 15 minutes or so before the end of our time together. There's been, of course, a number of you commenting and responding and raising questions on the chat and in the Q&A. I'd like to thank you for all of those, but I'll just take out 3 of those questions. I'll have to be selective because of time, so please, my apologies for those who I'm not able to choose. But I'd like to read those 3 questions and ask the 4 panelists to select 1 at max 2 of these questions to respond to briefly, each one of you. And so allow me to then think about, okay, sorry, I will read you those questions. Whoops, of course, I'm having problems retrieving them. There we go. Okay, so the first one is the following. How can religious leaders, faith groups engage and convince the private sector and governments to provide support for most vulnerable people, such as those in rural communities, so outside of cities, indigenous and stateless groups and refugees, especially, of course, during this pandemic crisis? So that's the first question. The second question is, there is a desire for many people to hear more concrete success stories of peaceful coexistence and collaboration during this time of crisis. Leonie, you provided several examples, and I think also some of you, Professor Rihanna and also Dr. Aziz and Baharudin, you provided at different levels, local in Malaysia and not more international in terms of Islamic responses. But are there a few other examples that, there may have been, maybe in Spain, Joan, I don't know if you have some concrete examples of that kind of religious and or multi-religious, inter-religious collaboration in this time of pandemic. And finally, there's a last question, which is about sort of the need to think about those who believe that religion does not have a role to play, despite what we are talking and sharing about. How do we respond to them in our midst when they say that religion are not big players in this process? And so, are there particular ways or cues that you have to help us, in a nutshell, to address those resistances to understandings of the particular multiple ways in which religious communities can be players in helping to reduce this crisis? So those are 3 questions among others. Thank you for those who raised them, and thanks for the others who unfortunately were not able to address your questions, but there we go. So I don't know who wants to go first. Just raise your hand if you're ready to address one of these questions in particular. Yes, okay, Professor Abdullah.
Okay, thanks, Professor Border. I try to respond to the first questions, actually, how to the religious leaders actually can, convince, especially the governments and also the private sector to, to address this issue. And I think the experience in Malaysia is that the religious leaders and also the public health, the Ministry of Health, and also the government itself, they work hand to hand. A good cooperations, to give informations to the, to the community. Okay, and not just among the Muslims community, but also among other religions as well. So I think how to convince the government. As I said, that the faith leaders or the religious leaders actually can influence the people's life. Okay, the people's behavior, how they think, and also to instill some good values, to calm down, and I said, as I said, that during this pandemic, especially the issue of death, the religion comes into the picture actually. To calm down the family, to give spiritual support. Okay, so my personal view is that we cannot deny that the religion is actually, all the religious leaders play a vital role, and also of course other medium such as mass media, social media, not just religious leaders, to address the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, thanks, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Abdullah. Now, Professor Baharudin.
Thank you very much, Professor Patrice. I would like to address question number 3, if I may. I know it should deserve, as always, more time, but I will try my level best, because I know this is a commonplace situation where we have, we sometimes, there are even our colleagues out there who feel that they don't believe that religion has anything to do or can provide solutions. My reaction is this: can we begin by defining the word religion? If I'm not mistaken, it comes from religare, being bounded to something. So I think seriously, every single person on the planet has a religion. Maybe tonight we are focusing on the major religions, quote unquote, so I think interfaith dialogue should also admit people who don't subscribe to the conventional religions, about the people who are agnostics, who are who are atheists. I think they deserve to be engaged, to be engaging with the rest of us. And as far as the problem with COVID or the problem with the environment, climate change is concerned, let's focus on the issue. The issue is the whole world. If you look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, all the 17 goals, can these people who say that religion has nothing to do with anything say that those goals are wrong? The United Nations is mistaken by identifying, because those goals were crystallized after the United Nations engaged so many hundreds of NGOs, so many sectors of society from the whole planet. So let's focus on the issue. Zero poverty, zero hunger, So what do they say about those things? And of course, this question is related to the second one. How do you engage policymakers, business people? The problem is we have been compartmentalizing religion and life. So one of the simple message of Islam, not very much understood by sometimes Muslims themselves, is that your whole life is your religion. They say Islam is a total way of life. And we are not saying this in a condescending manner at all, not at all. Yeah. So those people who say that religion has nothing to do, I think firstly, religious people should not be upset with them. Should sit down and say, okay, what is the problem facing you and me? We both need to eat, we both need to put our children to school, we both need to have clean air. Okay, what do we do to get those things? So this is where the empirical based data is critical. Science literacy is important. I'm not promoting scientism, not at all. But if you look at the Islamic knowledge tradition, okay, the book of nature is equally important, not equally important, is important to understand the revealed book. Like if the do's and don'ts in the Quran, for example, are speaking to you, okay, you have to be listening by being in touch with your body, with the environment. If religion says you have to do your salah, you have to do your wudu, you have to be clean and all of that, you cannot do that in just in your head. You have to actually be doing it. So I would say to friends like this, let's sit down, focus on the issues, talk about the solutions, and leave the issue of faith or ideology to a different stage, to a different time. So let's focus on what we need to do now together by recalling our common humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you for addressing both of these questions with great answers. Leonie first, and then we'll have as a final speaker and respondent Joan. Leonie?
Thank you very much. So I'm going to also try and wrap it into the two, like you just did, Dr. Azizan, in the two responses. I think what we've seen in the UK, and I've seen now represent also out in countries in Europe, is that if we recognise that civil society, faith sector is so integral to civil society, we are in a position to actually be much more outspoken as faith leaders and faith actors. And I think a lot of faith leaders that I was on a webinar just the other day, are often worried or just embarrassed to say what faith they have. If we give people the comfort to actually say, I am this or I am this faith, and how it affects my belief and my work, that is a good start. And it's certainly the case of governments that they do not like to mix religion and politics. They do not like to say, I'm actually a practicing Christian. And I think it's our job to actually try and help them understand that it's those very ethical and belief system which can transform their thinking and include and be much more inclusive of our sector. I think also it's onus on us in the faith sector that we need to move away a little bit from the dialogue to much more about action. So we need to be able to quantify our actions. You can even see, and I'm not a particularly expert in this, but the work of the young Norwegian girl within climate, how she managed to make a difference. We had an example of a very famous footballer here who changed the government's view on giving out lunches to kids who needed it for schools. So we need to be able to hear young people's voices and need to be able to call to action. So moving from the dialogical position to an active one is very important. And I think that also translates, and this I'll finish, for young people, we need to be able to quantify how many people have we helped from the faith communities with homelessness? How many bits of food poverty are we supporting? What aid are we giving, etc.? And it's not difficult. Governments take notice of figures and facts. And that's what I think our job is to present. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leonie. And now, Joan.
Okay, thank you very much. Rapidly to show you some examples of how the interreligious dialogue in Spain is working during the confinement. During the lockdown especially, we have problem the religions assistance and the different religions and different interface groups to create a resource with praying, with the TV, with message, especially for the hospital assistants, that they provide this message to the people that they live a lonely situation. We have not contact with the family. We have not contact with the religious people, and they create resources of different prayers to sharing, and the people to follow in this moment with some hopefully some message about his religion's community. And also now the different interfaith groups are working to create an interreligious ceremony. And the administration to create a non-believed and not religion public ceremony, and now we are working to coordinate another perspective and how interfaith ceremony for hosting all the situation, not only for the families and the people are illness and together.
Thank you. Gracias, Joan. Let me conclude in brief. We've heard incredible stories and examples and arguments for how religious communities and actors at different levels, at different ages, are participating and volunteering, and in official ways are participating in decreasing the impact of the coronavirus worldwide. What I'd like to say is finish with a few key words here: more accountability, more responsibility, but also more meaningful understanding of what's happening, bringing science and religion together so that the meaning of this crisis becomes more understandable, more manageable for each, because it is not just a sanitary crisis. It is not just the incredible economic crisis that is ensuing from all of this worldwide, but it is also, a social crisis for all the reasons that were mentioned already. And finally, among other crises, that we can point to, it's also a spiritual crisis, because the traditional practices of religious communities are just like topsy-turvy and forced to reinvent themselves. And not everybody has access to online either. That's barely half the planet. And so what about the other half? And so as we understand sort of the challenges that we're facing, and as the glaring inequalities become even more glaring, then how do we respond? And this is where the bridges of dialogue that have been slowly being built at local, national, international levels for decades now are finally there in place to allow for that collaboration in action. The call to action in the face of this is it's not time that much for interreligious dialogue at a theological level. It's time for interreligious collaboration on the local level, with also people that don't have a religious identity, together as common human beings facing those crises and coming together in reinventing our world. We are living in an unprecedented time. There's a double crisis worldwide: the climate challenge to the future of humanity, and Spear now sort of focused with this sanitary crisis of COVID, raising and allowing us to see what the limits of some of our human behaviors have been. But in the midst of all of this, there are many silver lines, and many of them have been mentioned today, and I just won't repeat them, but I just want to thank all of the four panelists for their presentations, their contributions to making those silver linings clearer, and understanding that that's where we take our hope, our examples, and hopefully that will empower us to actually be more active on the ground locally, wherever we are, through our own circles of influences, wherever we are. So again, many, many thanks to the four panelists, to all of those of you who have joined in during this virtual webinar, and good luck and health to all of you, and courage in the face of this resilience that we need to show from the heart of our humanity with each other, and all those affected by the situation today. So again, many thanks to all, and also a small little big thank you to the organizer of this, especially Anya, but also those behind the scenes. There's Valentin, there's Daryl, there's Elmira, and there's several others that are not seen. You don't see their names, but they're there also, and I'd like to thank them all. So again, I'm going to finish now on Terima kasih, Toda rabba, gracias, thank you to all. Bye.